President Jimmy Carter is dead at 100. R.I.P. Jimmy. So, did you know? Jimmy Carter's dad, James Carter Sr., ran for and was elected to the first and only political office he ever held, that of member of Georgia House of Representatives in 1952. He took office in January 1953 and stuck around until he died 7 months later from pancreatic cancer. James Sr.'s father, Jimmy's grandfather, William Archibald Carter, was murdered in 1904 by a business partner. 9-year-old James witnessed it. Their family relocated to Plains, GA, and James was enrolled in Riverside Military Academy. Something like 80 years later, Ceelo Green, hip-hop singer, rapper, and all-around luminary, who was a part of Goodie mob and Gnarls Barkley, attended and graduated from the same Riverside Military Academy. His own father died at age 2. Well, or rather, Ceelo, a.k.a. Thomas Decarlo Callaway, was 2 when his daddy died. His mom died when he was 18, after being paralyzed from a car crash. Jimmy Carter often pointed out how his father hadn't finished high school, which had been a Carter tradition for 400 years. Allegedly, none had finished high school. Jimmy did. He also got a Bachelor of Science from the U.S. Naval Academy. Jimmy had a naval career, including officer school and time on submarines, then became associated with the nuclear submarine program, etc. In December 1952, Canada's Chalk River Laboratories nuclear reactor had a meltdown, flooding its basement with radioactive water. Jimmy was sent along with a team to help out. The radiation was so bad, think of the scenes in HBO's Chernobyl, that they had to lower workers down for only 90 seconds at a time to limit exposure. Jimmy was lowered down to turn a single screw. Later, he intended to work aboard the USS Seawolf, the U.S.'s second nuclear submarine. But his dad died of pancreatic cancer in 1953, so Jimmy moved back to Georgia to take over running the peanut farm. His wife, Rosalind, who only just died this past November, who had grown accustomed to living in Schenectady, NY, at that point, felt moving back to Plains, GA was a monumental step backward. After his father's estate was settled and divvied up, Jimmy inherited very little. He and Rosalind lived in public housing for 3 years. They struggled, but sought further education and advancement, and eventually became quite successful. Much later, in 1971, he became governor of Georgia. Only a year or so later, he made attempts at starting a national campaign for president, but got little traction. As mentioned, Jimmy's grandfather was murdered. Jimmy's father died of pancreatic cancer. Turns out 3 of his younger siblings, including Billy Beer Carter, who had once urinated on an airport runway in full view of the press, but who also helped increase the family peanut business revenue to $1, and who had a wildly successful gas and service station, all died of pancreatic cancer too. Jimmy's dad was 58 when he died. Ruth was 54. Billy was only 51. And Gloria, whose name Jimmy as a child pronounced as Go-Go, was 63. Jimmy's mother died of breast cancer at 85, shortly after he left office. Interestingly, in light of the ongoing claims of Hunter Biden reaping unwarranted and potentially pay-to-play-based profit from his dealings from Ukraine to China, Jimmy's brother Billy was caught up in a scandal involving Libya, of all places. Allegedly, he'd begun some kind of a relationship with Libya, or elements within it, to the degree that he had to register as a foreign agent of the Libyan government, and he received a loan of $200,000 from Libya, of which the NY Times speculated he paid back only $1,000. Edwin Wilson, whom I probably wrote about during a previous rabbit hole of research extravaganza, said it was more like $2 million, and if I didn't write about him, I need to. Idaho bloke with a big CIA career, which officially ended in 1971, who then got railroaded by his own gov, go figure, and in 4 separate trials in the 80s, he was indicted on many different charges, most revolving around his many dealings with Libya, gun running, training operatives, etc., and sentenced to a combined total of 52 years in prison. One of his central claims in defense was that he had still been working for the CIA and his activities were at their behest. Nope. Prison for you, sucker. 3 days after one of his trails ended, the CIA admitted that the affidavit used against him that showed he was no longer employed by outworking for the CIA was fake. CIA said they had advised the prosecution not to use it, but the lawyer did anyway. Shocker. Nevertheless, Wilson spent 22 years in person, over 12 of which in solitary confinement, before finally he was exonerated. In October 2003, by U.S. District Judge Lynn Hughes, overturning his conviction on the explosives charge, found that U.S. Justice Department prosecutors knew Wilson had worked for the CIA. Sane, that's nice. He was freed, nearly a whole year after that even, in September 2004, and subsequently sued 7 federal prosecutors, 2 of which are now federal judges, and a past executive director of the CIA. On March 29, 2007, U.S. District Judge Lee Rosenthal dismissed his case on the ground that all 8 had immunity covering their actions. Yay, immunity. Anyway, Edwin P. Wilson had been spelunking about in Libya right around the time Billy Carter had visited there 3 times and had to register as a foreign agent, and received a $200,000 loan from them. Wilson, though, claimed he had seen a telegram showing that Libya paid Billy Carter $2 million. Jimmy Carter, perhaps admirably, seems to have been genuinely concerned about Billy's activities, and rather than denying or downplaying them, like some presidents are wont to do, "I'm looking at you, big guy," said, "I am deeply concerned that Billy has received funds from Libya and that he may be under obligation to Libya. These facts will govern my relationship with Billy as long as I am president. Billy has had no influence on U.S. policy or actions concerning Libya in the past, and he will have no influence in the future." Now, a few more tidbits about Jimmy's sister, Gloria. What a hoot. She was an American motorcyclist and activist, and reportedly, the smartest, most interesting, most attractive, most outgoing, and most talented of the Carter children. Jimmy and her weren't super close early on. Jimmy shot her with a BB gun after she threw a wrench at him when they were children. But later they became extremely close, and she worked on several of his campaigns. She married a war hero, who by then had been a former drugstore clerk, so their father disapproved. She had a son, William, but when it was found out she was victim to repeated brutal beatings by her husband, her father helped her get the marriage annulled. She remarried the next year. She was noted as one of the first women inducted into Harley-Davidson's 100,000-mile club, was named Most Outstanding Female Motorcyclist in 1978. Her son, William, was a troubled soul and a nocturnal wanderer, sometimes gone for 3 to 4 days at a time. He eventually moved to CA in 1969, and she didn't hear from him for the last 21 years of her life. When Jimmy was in office, someone interviewed William in jail and asked about Jimmy Carter. He said, "He's in the White House, and I'm in the big house." In 1979, Gloria was herself arrested for disorderly conduct when she refused to stop playing a harmonica in a McWaffle restaurant in Americus, Georgia. Now, be it also known that Jimmy Carter's great-grandpappy, James Thomas Goodie, was also the great-grandpappy of none other than legendary music producer Wah Mogul Berry Gordy. Yep, you got that right. Great-grandpappy Jimmy Goodie was a slave owner and took a liking to one of his slaves, as was common. Thus spawned one Berry Gordy IV, grandfather of Berry Gordy III, known simply as Junior. Berry Gordy the Y had a half-brother named James Jackson Jack Goodie, who was Jimmy Carter's grandfather. Jimmy named one of his sons Jack. Jimmy's mom's name was Bessie Lillian Goodie. She's the one off by breast cancer shortly after he left office. Also, earlier, when Jimmy was a member of the Georgia State Senate, from January 1963 to January 1967, he was succeeded by some bloke named Hugh Carter. Oh, that'd be Jimmy's first cousin. He stayed in that office until 1981. We're pretty much done here now. But one must still wonder how and why a relatively little-known governor of Georgia could evolve from almost total national obscurity to win the presidency, all in the space of about 9 months. It's a bit of a mystery, but it is known that on David Rockefeller's endorsement, he was named to the Trilateral Commission in April 1973. That's a spooky organization, they say, where the power resides and such. Also, somewhat reminiscent of what happened with Trump, whether by design or in spite of news media's calculations. In 1980, Lawrence Shoup noted that the national news media discovered and promoted Carter and stated, "What Carter had that his opponents did not was the acceptance and support of elite sectors of the mass communications media. It was their favorable coverage of Carter and his campaign that gave him an edge, propelling him rocket-like to the top of the opinion polls. This helped Carter win key primary election victories, enabling him to rise from an obscure public figure to president-elect in the short space of 9 months. Why they latched onto him, kingmaker style, and suddenly turned him into the frontrunner, who knows? But after Nixon and his pardon-given VP, Ford, stinking up the joint, people may have been ready for an outsider who appeared to have some decency. Or he was tapped by the powers that be. Oh yeah, and Carter filed a report with both the International UFO Bureau and the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, stating that he sighted an unidentified flying object in October 1969. Addendum to my Jimmy Carter story. Interview with the attorney who finally got Idaho CIA guy Edwin P. Wilson out of prison after 22 years. See the link in the description for the video.